Chris Simon, the CEO of Haemonetics, a Boston-based medtech company focused in hematology. And amongst other things, we do plasma collection and apheresis. I am honored and privileged to be joined today by John Boyle, who, in addition to being an important patient suffering from primary immune deficiency, is also the president and CEO of IDF, the leading patient advocacy foundation. John, welcome.
Thanks, Chris. I really appreciate it.
Give the audience a little sense for your background, John, and what IDF does.
Sure. Well, IDF was founded in 1980 as your kind of typical kitchen counter rare disease organization trying to fill a need for those who had a very rare disease that no one had ever heard of. And what we've evolved into over the last 39 years is an organization that really seeks to be at the center of all the different issues that may affect a patient, from the research issues to the legislative advocacy issues to all the support issues that IDF is uniquely situated to help them with. So again, anything that essentially helps to orient patients to this new diagnosis. We seek to be there and to advance diagnosis as well.
So John, take us back a step. Please explain for our audience what primary immune deficiency is, secondary immune deficiency, and the various treatments that are available to those patients.
Sure. Well, primary immunodeficiencies are defects of the immune system where a piece of your immune system is either missing or not functioning properly. And so basically you are born with an inability to fight off infections in the way that someone like you or members of the audience here might be able to. There's over 350 different forms of PI. I have one called XLA. It's quite rare, as all of them are. Some people know severe combined immune deficiency. David Vedder, the boy in the plastic bubble from the 1970s and 80s, is another form. But there's a lot of variability between these different forms of PI. But one of the underlying commonalities is we're all susceptible to infection, and happily many of us can have a piece of what it is that we're missing that is replaced. In my condition, and the same with many others, it's the antibodies that we are missing can be actually replaced by pooled antibodies that other people donate.
It's fascinating. Given the broad spectrum, I realize it's difficult to generalize, but take us through a day in the life of a moderate to severe primary immunodeficient patient.
It is tricky because, again, there's so much variability, but I'll tell you a little bit about some of my considerations today. So I'm on, an antibody replacement therapy, which I have to take once a week. Well, this coming weekend, I'm supposed to be doing a Cub Scout camp out with my son, and so it becomes a matter of, okay, when do I schedule that? How do I make sure that I get that in? Meanwhile, when I get home tonight, I've got to make sure that I actually pay all the various bills that I have to pay, because the therapy that I receive is very, very expensive, and by gosh, insurance and expensive therapies is a potent combination. And then finally, my hope is, as I travel back to the Baltimore area, that in going on the plane and meeting everyone here, that I don't get sick, because, again, I am given back some of what it is that I'm missing through this antibody replacement therapy, but I'm still pretty vulnerable. And so every day for someone with a primary immunodeficiency is a little bit of risk assessment. And so a lot of Purell, a little bit of risk management, that is a part of what it is that we deal with on a hour-to-hour and day-to-day basis.
Hour-to-hour, day-to-day risk assessment, made different by the treatments that are available, IVIG, SCIG.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about the therapy that is available to you and that your foundation advocates for on behalf of patients.
Sure. As I mentioned before, it's an antibody replacement therapy. So you and everyone else here produces antibodies on your own. But meanwhile, what can be done is those antibodies, which are found in human plasma, can actually be taken out of the plasma and then fractionated and then made into a therapy such as what I get. Now, back in the old days, in the late 70s when I was first diagnosed, they were these horrible intermuscular injections, and the bioavailability was not great. fast forward to the early 80s, and intravenous immunoglobulin, IVIG, became available, which was a game changer. Third best day of my life was the day that I went over to IVIG. But more recently, in the last 10 plus years, we now have subcutaneous IG. So it's a different format where basically you do an infusion into your legs, into your abdomen, wherever there's a little bit of subcutaneous tissue. And it's easy, painless, by and large, if you get the needle right. But it gives us back what it is that we're missing in most cases, as in antibodies. So it's a really amazing therapy, and one that has gone through really a revolution just in my lifetime.
It's encouraging and inspiring to hear. You know a little bit about us at Haemonetics. Mm-hmm. We participate on the front end of a very complicated and lengthy supply chain. We help the major biopharmaceutical companies to collect source plasma, particularly collection and apheresis. What advice do you have for us as we aspire to serve you and the broader IDF patient community better?
I think that, as far as advice goes, because you occupy one piece of what we consider kind of the supply chain that eventually leads to people like me receiving this therapy. I think what I've seen over the years, and especially as we're kind of in a tricky situation right now with a shortage of immunoglobulin and other plasma products, is communication. Your piece of the supply chain does not exist in a vacuum. So as you're dealing with regulators, as you're dealing with other pieces of the supply chain, as you have new offerings that people at the FDA may only be tangentially aware of, or one office may, but one other office might not. There's conversations going on all the time about how to solve some of these macro problems, and every piece of the supply chain needs to be understood, and I don't know that everyone is necessarily always at the table. So I think communications, showing up, and partnering, of course, with the patients to make sure that you understand from our side what it is that is impactful, what it is that we're worried about, and basically how to make sure that the train stays on the tracks.
Okay, well, given that it starts with showing up, are we on the right track? We focus on yield. We want to make sure every available milliliter of plasma that's donated ends up into fractionation. We want to help the centers be more productive. We want to assure 100% compliance and quality, and we want to improve that donor satisfaction so the donors continue to come back to make that life-altering contribution. Does that resonate with you?
It does, not just saying this because we happen to be on stage together at the moment, but everything appears to be on track as it should be. You're doing your part, and I think just about everyone else in the supply chain is doing theirs. The problem is that the needs are changing and growing. The need for plasma just continues to grow. So what works today, and the fact that we're doing pretty well today, does not necessarily mean that a couple of years from now, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, we're all going to be where we need to be. There has to be constant innovation because the demand for plasma and products like immunoglobulin, which members of our community take, is so vital to our survival that really anything that could ever alter it, anything that could disrupt the supply chain, is nightmare fuel.
What keeps you up at night?
Well, kind of going back to what I was just saying there, I think a disruption in the supply chain. I mean, we are so vulnerable. Right now, everything is working as it should, but if there is a problem on your end, if there's a problem with the collection, with the fractionation, any of those things, those of us whose lives rely on immunoglobulin, those who rely on other plasma products, hemophilia factors, alpha-1 antitrypsin, there's so many lives that are dependent on a very fragile supply chain. So if everything continues to go as it should, great. But there's just not a lot of wiggle room. And if one plant goes down or one company who has a lot of the market share has an issue, then the reverberations are going to be felt globally.
Understood. Any thoughts, anything you'd like to say on, to those donors who are, I think, the real unsung heroes of this equation?
Well, without them, I would not be here. I would not have survived past 1978. Tens of thousands of other people, much in the same line. They don't get praised the way that those who give whole blood through things like the Red Cross do. They're not as well known. What it is that they do is not well understood, but it is just as and maybe even more valuable. So to all the donors, to all of the center managers who are involved in plasma collection, and then to all the companies, all the device manufacturers and everyone else, it may not always seem that way, but you are saving lives. And for that, my community and many other rare disease communities are truly grateful.
John, thanks for that. It ties back to the theme of this conference, right? Improving healthcare, improving lives. It's something we aspire to at Haemonetics. You make it clear just how important what we do is each day and why it matters. Thank you for that.
Happy to, Chris. It's a pleasure.